few weeks. Like Clint said, we're in the final part of our series, Let There Be Light, where we've been anchoring on the promise and the declaration in John 1:5 that the light shines in the darkness and the darkness has not overcome it. And we have come to understand with real clarity, hopefully, if you've been here the last few weeks, that Jesus is that light, that he is the one who shines in the darkest of places, and he can't be outnumbered, he can't be overpowered, that he is victorious and withstands anything and everything, so that hope is possible, so that we can see an alternative to maybe the pain and the darkness that we have been in. We've been unpacking what is a really delicate and diverse and broad topic of trauma. And one of the things we've landed on an understanding of us having collectively is that trauma is a diverse experience. That your story may look so different to someone else's, but it could still hold some trauma in it. And how you've handled that and responded to that is something that we don't want to put a judgment on, because we firmly believe we do the best with what we have and what we know. And when we know better, then we can do better. But it takes some time and often some intervention to get the support and the knowledge to do the better or to see something change. So what we're trying to do in the series is kind of take off the judgment that we might have about how people walk through difficult things, and to also offer some compassion to ourselves and to others, that we don't know the full story. We don't know why people are the way they are, but we want to offer respect and kindness, and we want to hold space for people wherever they are at. We also define trauma. So if you've been here the whole series, you're like, we have heard this again. But for those that are new, it's important we have the shared language as we go forward. We've defined trauma as the emotional response that best describes the lasting impacts of distressing and disturbing events in which we didn't have control or in which our survival was threatened. And it's really key that we understand that when trauma happens, it's a threat to our safety, that our brain goes on to high alert and it's trying to do the very best to protect us, because that's what it is made to do, from what it perceives to be the threat. And it's about the lasting, ongoing impact, about how trauma can reorganize our brains and how we therefore think going forward. And so if you're like, I want to know more about that skimming the surface wasn't enough, you need to go back and listen to week 1. But I also am going to give you a whole lot of resources today for your own continued learning, if that feels like you. But one of the things last week, if you were here, we plugged into was defining the difference between stress and distress, being that trauma kind of state, where stress is those everyday things that build that can become overwhelming, but it's our job to learn to manage that, to get resourced and skilled to manage our own workload or stress level. And that's really different to one of those life-altering kind of trauma events. So we tried to create a little bit of distance between those two things. And we talked a lot about what it means for us to walk in the light, to do this personal work of following after Jesus. This week, we look at what does it mean for us outwardly, in our community, in our relationships. How do we take what we've learned and then apply it to how we interact with other people? But I wanted us to be reminded of 1 John 2:6 that says, whoever says that he abides in him ought to walk in the same way that he walked. Whoever says he loves Jesus, whoever says he knows the Lord, he ought to walk in the same way that Jesus walked. Our manner, our actions, our attitudes, the words that come from our mouth, they must match and mirror Jesus. We're not going to get it perfect, but that is the goal. That is what we are streamlining our life to be more and more like Jesus. And we tried to kind of bring a bit of power to why we want to do this change, why we want to look at some of the stuff that's going on in our world. And this is not the same powerful illustration, but you'll get it by the picture if you were here, hopefully, is that what has been passed down from one generation to the next, if there's been no intervention, no change, means that what's in our grandparents' cup gets poured into our parents' cup, and if they don't have any intervention and change, gets poured into our cup, and then we have a choice. We can stay in the darkness. We can stay in the hurt. We can stay in what we called the cave last week, where it's just us in the silo of pain. Or we can add in some light. We can let Jesus into what's happening. We can partner with him through the process and see it transform and change so that what we have to pour into the next generation is different, so that they have an opportunity to walk with something different than what we have been given. But the thing is if nothing changes, then nothing changes. If you don't take stock of what's going on, if you don't look at, hey, maybe where is there some pain in my life, then you're going to stay in that same cycle. You're going to do the best with what you can, but it may not be sufficient to create lasting change for you or for the generations to come in your world, whether that's from your own family or from those that you influence. Do we somewhat feel caught up from last week? Yeah. And if you're like, whoa, that was a lot, and we just kind of hit some big ideas, again, you've got to go back and listen because we took our time to set this up and to understand it. So what do we do with all of this? What does this mean for us today? We've been defining two things. We have an invitation to walk in the light and to go and be the light. That we get to walk hand in hand with Jesus and figure out our personal journey with him, and then we go. We go and we be that hope, we be that light to the communities and places and families that we exist in. And I am a firm believer that it's not and or, one or the other. It's both and. We do these simultaneously. We don't have to sort it all out and feel like, yep, I'm totally walking in the light, whatever that means to you. I've got it sussed. I have been therapized. I've listened to every podcast. I'm getting my 10,000 steps in a day. Like, I am nailing this thing. Now I can go and be an influence to people. The joy of life with God is that he partners with us to do both of those things at the same time. That as we start this journey of becoming more and more like Jesus, as his light shines in our life, as the cave turns into a tunnel and we see there's another way forward, that actually he then also uses that as an influence to the people around us because they notice. We notice when someone's doing better. We notice when some habits or behaviors have changed. If you are attentive, you'll see it in their face. It's the first thing I notice with my clients. When things start to change, their faces change. They genuinely look healthier. And it's obvious to people who have got the eyes to see it that something is changing. And what I love about this change is that it makes people curious. What's going on? What's different? Why are you not doing that same thing at work that has annoyed me for decades? Why is it all of a sudden different? People get curious and they want to know about what is happening internally that leads to this external transformation. And this is what we see in Matthew, where Jesus is talking to the disciples and he says, "You are the light of the world." This is a super famous chunk of scripture. I'm sure most of us will know it. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. What he has begun in us is not just for us. Yes, it radically changes us. Yes, we encounter freedom. Yes, we feel like new people under this light and this way of living with God. But it's also supposed to be for others. It's supposed to be the evidence of a very real God at work in a world that desperately needs him. And when we have that power, like a lamp that gives light to a house, we don't go and cover it, do we? But we also don't go and praise the lamp and go, "Oh my goodness, that lamp's amazing. Did you hear what the lamp did? Did you see what it did?" That's not the goal either. The goal is that as we live out this changed and transformed life, that people get curious and we get to say, "Hey, this is a lot to do with my life with the Lord." He gets the glory. He gets the recognition because he's the one doing that work in partnership with us. Does this make sense? Does this resonate? Does this feel exciting to anyone? That like your story actually, as we do that work, as we let light in, becomes a help to other people. And one of the things we hear is like, there's a reason for everything. No, I just like fundamentally disagree with that. I think that's our way to try and reason pain. But there is purpose that comes out of pain. God will use it, He will transform us, and it will be hope and a picture to others of what is available. Because if He's done it in them, maybe He could do it in my life. Maybe this could change. And so the way you walk this out, the way you walk tandem, hand in hand with Jesus, it actually matters, not just for you, but for those around you. So today we look at what does it mean to go and be the light. I promised I would be really practical, but I also want us to have a good picture of why this stuff matters. So I'm going to put it down to a vote. Would you rather have the practical first or have the big picture inspiration first? If you want practical, put your hand up. If you want the inspiration big picture, oh, interesting. I thought it'd be the other way around. Okay, then story time. Let's go. When I say go and be the light, when I talk about this series, in week 1, I said that the words of John 1:5, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it, is a verse seared into my soul, deeply imprinted in my being because of a really unique experience I had. And I wasn't going to share it, but as I've thought more and more, I thought actually the story is helpful for us to see why we're all part of this, why this isn't just for some, but for everyone. So when I was about 21, 22, just last year, I was part of a leadership team for a gap year program that took 18-year-olds to all across New Zealand, but then to Thailand for quite a number of months. And while we were there, we did a whole lot of missional work and worked with local organisations to kind of support them in the work that they were already doing. One of the places we worked with was called Destiny Rescue at the time. Now it's called Child Rescue, which you might have heard of. And the mission of this organisation is to rescue children from the prostitution ring, the sex slavery kind of industry that's happening across the world. Thailand is like the capital for this in the world, which is like, ugh, gross. And there's a really dark underbelly to what kind of maintains that to be true. So a lot of people flock to Thailand for this industry, for want of a better word. And we were working with a company that rescues. They literally have these kind of what do we call them? Like undercover operations to rescue girls and boys out of prostitution. And they have to be really clever, and they work with trustworthy local police because there's a lot of dodgy local police as well. And once they get these children out, they then have programs and houses where they rehabilitate them. So then the therapeutic work and the support happens, and then eventually, when they're well enough, they then train and educate them to have a future, to learn a trade or a skill so that they can monetize it and survive and not have to go back to how they lived. There's a beautiful preventative measure to this too, which I thought was so cool. Part of the bigger, wider problem is that there's a lack of education and understanding from especially rural hill tribe kind of villages about what's going on in the bigger cities. And so people would come to these villages and say, hey, I can get a job for your child. I can give them a new job, a new future. They can have an education, like everything could change, and they could send money home to you. And so these families trust these people and give them their children, and they take them to the city only to realize that they don't have legitimate jobs, that they now forced into prostitution. And the parents lose track of the kids, they can no longer find them, and so there's a lot of missing posters in Thailand too, which is pretty tragic. And so this organisation, they go to those hill tribes and they say, hey, beware of these people and how they talk. If you would all feel like you would want that for your child, a new future, a change, then let us know and we will partner with you. And so then they created these schools where they'd take those vulnerable children and keep those relationships with family intact, but they would educate and train them and give them a future to protect them from what was happening to a lot of other kids. So this is a big, widespread organisation that's working far wider than just Thailand. But the work they're doing is phenomenal. And in that rehab education sector of what they do, they have a cafe where once they've trained some of these survivors up, they then work in the local cafe, or they might be jewelry makers or whole lot of other things. And we visited the cafe, having already worked with these faces that are imprinted in my soul for the last few weeks. And in this cafe, on the wall, was a picture of kind of a night scene in Thailand, like lots of lights, flashing cars kind of moving through, and the silhouette of an adult holding a child's hand. And plastered in bright white were the words of John 1:5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So this organisation is faith-based. They are Christians who want to see this work change and justice for these children. But underneath those words was an inscription. If not us, then who? And that changed my life. Because it's not these big heroes. This call is not for the well-educated. It's not for the well-resourced. It's for every single one of us. If not us, then who? If we aren't willing to stand in the dark as holding up the light of Jesus, then who the heck is going to do it? Who's going to change the story for people? Who's going to shine the light that there's another alternative, that there's another way? And in sharing this, I don't expect that we're all going to get up and buy plane tickets to Thailand to go be a part of what Child Rescue is doing. Some of us might feel like that's what the Lord's saying. Don't let me stop you. But it's about us here in our own backyard. This stuff happens. And in grander scale and in littler scale, people are living in the dark. And it is our responsibility, it is our moral duty to go and be that light for people who so desperately need it. This is the one job that the Lord has desperately asked us to do. Go and be the light. I love that we gather. I love the church. I love the expression of the local church on a Sunday. I think what we do here is vital and important and builds us up. And I love that Life Switch is a place that is set on being accessible to all people, no matter the background, no matter the story. But if all we did was gather, it would be a tragedy. We also have to go. We have to do both of these things. We have to go and represent Jesus wherever we are, however we are, and trust that he will use us in the seasons and the situations that we find ourselves in. So the call, the mandate, the invitation is to go and be the light. As I've just shared all of that, I want you to talk to the person next to you for a second. What comes to mind in your setting of maybe what that darkness is? What's local? What's actually relevant for you of what that might be? And then I'll call you back. I wish I could hear all of these conversations and know what it is that is starting to land for you. That's my great hope, is that we would personalize this stuff, that it's not just some ideas that get kind of offered from the front, but it's actually things that we can do in our world, faces and people and places that we go, yeah, that's what I have been asked to do. One of the things that we often do as Jesus followers is we ask this question of what is the call on my life? What is the will of God for my life? What's this one thing that he wants me to do? And we can get really caught up in trying to figure that out of like the work I do, the way that I talk to people, the missional things I do, the things I give to. But I want to make it super simple. It isn't a blueprint. It isn't do this, do that, and it's different for you and it's different for you. It's a big, wide playground. And the kind of boundary of it is two things. Love God and love people. And how you do that will totally come down to how you have been wired, how the Lord has gifted you, to the community and the family that you exist in. That's the job. Love God, love people. And as you do that, you will be transformed into the likeness and image of Jesus, and you will represent him to that community. So you will be walking in the light, and you will go and be the light as you love those around us, because that's what this comes down to. Do we love others enough to have the hard conversations, to stand up and say, hey, this isn't okay, or I've noticed things aren't great, or you seem to be down. What's going on? Are we courageous? Are we willing? Are we loving enough to not just let this stuff slide? It's uncomfortable. It's really awkward half the time because we don't know if there's anything really going on. But it is quite okay. It's a lot less threatening to ask, like, hey, are you doing okay? Are things really all right? I've noticed you're a bit low. Than to come in with like an accusation of what we think might be happening. So we go curiously, we have a wondering about it. But it's actually really simple, and it's on each and every one of us to do. And so as we get practical, I want to talk about what can be harmful in those big, courageous conversations and what can be helpful. Because we talked a lot last week about how the first step in getting out of the cave, if we feel like we're in the darkness, is letting light in by trusting someone safe and someone skilled to support us. For a lot of us, the biggest intervention that will ever happen in our story is that we told someone else and we didn't stay silent in it. But who that person is and how they respond is really crucial to what we do next, with how we kind of judge how okay this story is or how serious it is. And so the negative is always easier for us to kind of sink our teeth into. So we're going to start with that, and then we're going to talk about what's helpful. So you can take a photo of this or write notes, whatever you want. The first thing, if you are the trusted person that someone's going to share their story with, what can be harmful is when we minimize it. When we say, oh, that's not so bad. You're fine. Oh, I heard that happen to so-and-so and they're all good. We minimize their pain and we really invalidate what they've experienced. It can be super harmful. When we tell them how to feel about it, when we say that their feelings are too big or too small, or that they're not angry enough, or they're not sad enough, or whatever it is, when we try to enforce how we feel about it or how we think they should feel about it, we're actually taking away their story. We're taking away their power and what they're telling us. Classically, when we make it about ourselves, I don't think a lot of us mean to do this, but I think we try to relate. And so we go, oh, yeah, that happened to me, or I've experienced that, or I know someone. And all of a sudden, we've turned this really vulnerable moment into something about us. Doesn't sit well, does it? So I think being really cautious and intentional to be about the person, to be about their story is important. What can really harm a person is when we reject them for their story. When we say, that is just not okay, that's too much, I don't want to hear it, I can't handle that, like that's not for me, and we shut them down. Or we stop talking to them now that they've told us this big thing. That is so detrimental to feeling like we could work through this, that my story isn't too big, it's not too bad, that there actually could be someone to sit with me through this. When we blame them, I just feel like this is in every TV show and movie we've ever seen, when a woman gets violated or attacked and the question is, well, what were you wearing? Why were you out alone at night? Like, why do we put the blame on someone for what someone else has done? And we can do that in really small micro ways and not realize it. The position, the posture we need to have is just a genuine curiosity about the person and about the story, and not about what would have changed that, what would have kind of made that a safer situation. The next is when we keep them silent. This is tricky and delicate and depends on every story, but often when something quite big has happened, our gut reaction is to say, don't tell anyone else about this. It would just be best if this stayed between you and I, because the mess of that news getting out can be really difficult to manage. And I think sometimes there's wisdom, but it's also ultimately not our choice. When we're talking about an adult telling us about their story, their choice, their power is who they tell and how they tell it. That's not actually on us to judge. When we're talking about a child, we want them to feel like they can tell us whatever happens, has happened or might happen. So we want to keep that open line of communication, that safety. And then we want to do something really wise with that information if we need to. Is this making sense? We're tracking along? Judging their reactions. This is something that I think, again, we're doing before we realise it. It's just like, wow, you seem really upset about that. Maybe we could just calm down. Maybe just stop the tears and we could talk about it. Just, take a deep breath rather than just letting them feel their feelings. Those feelings won't kill them and they won't kill you. They might be uncomfortable. They might be foreign, but they are ultimately just a feeling. And they need to be expressed so that this person can start to get to the next place of healing that they require. I mentioned this in week 1. We can do this thing called trauma bonding, which is then when someone tells us their big thing and that's happened to us too, or something similar. And what we are meaning usually, our intention is to be really supportive and to let them know they're not alone in this. Like, yes, me too, I've experienced this. And that can be powerful. But also what it does is it kind of takes us back to making it about us and not about them. And it's just a tricky line to find. And sometimes when we are sharing all of our trauma with someone and we're bonding over that, it's really powerful. It feels so intimate that someone else now knows what's happened and now I know what's happened to them, and we feel kind of equal in this and we can be shoulder to shoulder in it, and it can feel so, so powerful. The problem can be that no one's actually helping direct you to another alternative, to the next step. No one's going, hey, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to avoid just staying in this? Because that's when we stay in the cave, we just add one more person to it. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then when we share the story with others, this is something that I think we have to be so careful of, is that if someone's trusted you, they have not also trusted your husband or your wife or your sister or your mum or their children. They've trusted you as an individual. And it's our job to contain that story as best we can to honour them. The caveat to this, and I say this to every person I sit down and talk to, is I will hold space for this story, no matter what it is. The only time we need to involve other people is if I'm concerned for your safety or the safety of someone else. And that's when we actually have to do something to care for that person, where the most loving thing is that we don't keep the story to ourselves. And if you're a young person, the encouragement I would give you is that you probably should not keep the story to yourself. It is too much for you to carry. It was never meant for you as a teenager to be the safety or the solution to someone else. You need to tell a trusted adult if you're really concerned about a friend or about something you've heard, and to talk it out with them to get some support for what you might do next in helping and loving that person. So it's always a tricky one when we talk about this part of, do we share the story or don't we? I think we can define it by, is that person safe? If they are, cool, I can keep that story to myself. If they're not, then what do I need to do about that? And sometimes we don't know. So we have to kind of do some research, talk to a trusted professional and figure out what we could do to support them. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is all the stuff that if someone's telling us something big, whether it's in our workplace, which I feel like there's some big conversations that happen in workplaces, right? These are people you see and work with every single day. If it's in our family, if it's in our school, if it's in any other kind of interaction, that we want to be mindful of how we respond to people. And when we don't get this totally right, because it takes practice and learning and experience to feel like you're quite good at some of this stuff, we can go back and we can apologize, or we can say, hey, I was thinking that the way I responded just hasn't sat well with me. I'm sorry for that. Is there another way I could have responded that would have helped you? Which could be really repairing for that person. So there's a few options of what we can do there. Is that enough with the negative? Okay, what's helpful? How exciting. We can talk about the good stuff. We listen to them. And listening to understand, not listening to respond. Listening to hear the story, to give them our attention, which does mean our eyes on them, our body positioned towards them. Those little things are really important. We support their feelings. If they cry, we let them cry. We might politely hand them a tissue. If they're angry and they need a pace, we let them do that. It doesn't have to influence how we feel. We validate their experience. We say, man, that must have been hard. That must have been really difficult. We encourage their bravery, that they told someone. This is the biggest first step and the most important. And so we celebrate this all the time when people tell us what's going on. And we thank them for trusting us. That's an honor. That's a privilege. Even if you feel like you are quaking in your boots and you don't know what to do, someone saw something trustworthy in you to share what they were going through. That is a beautiful gift. We show compassion. We shoulder to shoulder them. We uffy them through this. We love them through this in whatever way we naturally feel that they need. I think one of the most helpful things after listening and validating and supporting a person is encouraging their next step. What are we going to do about this? What things have you already found helpful? What might need to be explored? Big one. I think this is where the friends, the community becomes so important, is the ongoing support. If someone's just said something big to you, the next time you see them, don't ignore it. Don't pretend like that conversation didn't just happen. Actually check in if it's appropriate. I've been thinking about you. How are you doing? Last week was a big week. Something kind and compassionate in that. You could send a text. You could flick them a message and say, hey, how you doing? That must have felt a little bit like a vulnerability hangover. What are you doing for yourself today to kind of help you through that? And then if you're a follower of Jesus, one of the most privileged and beautiful things we can do is ask to pray with them. We've heard the pain. We've heard the story. And now we can bring this before the God of all comfort and the God of all healing, and say, hey, this is big and it's too big for me, but Lord, you're in this. You are big enough for this and you know what this person needs. Would you come and meet them? Would you come and love them through this? So those are my really practical tips, which I could talk about for much longer, but some things for us to think about or to dialogue about after the service around what this means for us. If you have your phones out, this is the code of things that I have been talking about. There's a PDF that is attached to the QR code that's about to come up, and it has got resources for you to learn stuff if you want to know more. But it also has then got a link to a whole lot of podcasts. If you're like, I don't necessarily need to deeply understand trauma, I don't need to read some of the expert books, but I do want to think about how I regulate my emotions, or how I manage my stress levels, or how this impacts my relationships. And so the caveat is that like pretty much nothing in this list is by a Christian author, but these are, actually I lie, most of the podcasts. But a lot of the other stuff is just by experts in the field who haven't necessarily declared their faith or where they sit on things, but I think we hear so much goodness in them that it can be a real resource and a gift to us. So if you have questions about any of that stuff, my email is open. I'd love to hear from you as we kind of wrap up the series and walk through what this means for us as we walk in the light and we go and be the light. And so the final thing I want to bring us back to is, who was here in week 1? Heaps of us. This is awesome. We go back to week 1 and we think about that little demonstration we had, right? Where the lights dimmed and the room got spooky and we all felt uncomfortable. Cue the lights. And cue, beautiful. And I've asked you to be on your phone, so I'm not going to tell you off this time. But this is the place where this is what we might call the cave, right? Where we can't see what's in front of us, where it's hard to notice who's beside us or kind of where we're going. And when we talk about being the light in the darkness, this is what we're saying, is that this is Jesus. Jesus is the light. He's the one who starts to direct our steps. Like, I can see some people now. This is helpful. We also have a light at the back, so I can already see the exit out of here. Like, these two things are a good representation of the light that could be God in a dark place. Now, I want us to all turn on our phones, because I've just seen them out already. So every single one of us, light up the room. Pretend you're at an Adele concert or Teddy Swims or someone else. This is us. This is the church. This is our mandate to go and be the light, to go and see the story change, to go into the places that desperately need hope and a picture of what God could do. That's on us. And that's the picture I want to leave us with in this series, that this is on each and every one of us, not for the few, not for the well-educated, not for the well-resourced. If not us, then who? Hey. If not us, then who? This is the call of Jesus to each and every one of us, to go and be the light in the darkness, to represent Jesus in the places that need it, and see what he might do with our simple yes and our very brave steps.